Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 worst Brahms recordings. Oh dear. Now, bad Brahms is kind of interesting. It's hard to find it when you're dealing with chamber music, and even piano music to a certain extent, because, Brahms as a composer was so polished that he forces you to be on your best behavior. He doesn't give you a lot of freedom to be terrible and get away with it and think that you're like smarter than he was and you're imbuing the music with some ultra cosmic say. He wasn't like that at all. He was so fixated on basic musical values: clarity of line, detailed dynamics, textural, balance and rectitude in all things. So people are a little intimidated, and they tend, I think, to be a little conservative when it comes to making stupid choices. Such is not the case with his orchestral works. The reason, I think, is because his orchestration, especially in the symphonies, is a tad thick, and could use a little brightening up here and there. Conductors being who they are, and Brahms himself being who he was when it came to the original circumstances of performance of the symphonies and his discussions regarding things like repeats and orchestral size and whatnot. He leaves you the kind of wiggle room to be stupid and unmusical. And there are many stupid and unmusical conductors who have accordingly stepped up to the podium to give us their very best in stupidity and unmusicality. And so here are a bunch of them. And they are some big names. And some people who've done very well by Brahms and under other circumstances. Symphony number 1, Celibidache on Warner with his Munich forces. Ugh. Oh, his Brahms is all horrible. I mean, he sucks all of the drama out of the music. He changes where all the climaxes ought to be. The playing is soft and slushy and ponderous, and it's really bad. I mean, it's really, really awful. Some people swear by it. I know. One of the things that always fascinated me, my mother taught high school for decades and decades, public high school, and she always said to me, one of the things that always bothered her most, she wound up teaching a women's history course, one of the high school she taught at, because she felt that the girls in high school really needed to learn some self-respect and acquire some sense of their power as female human beings, because she said to me, some of these boys, they are so disgusting, and there is no boy who is so disgusting that he can't find some girlfriend. And this was driving her crazy. It was as she started this women's history program, to try and talk some sense into them. And you see the same thing, these serial killers, they're in jail and they get married in jail. They get love letters from these women. Well, frankly, people who like the Celibidache, Brahms' First Symphony, are the women in love with the serial killers, or the high school girls with no self-respect going out with the skeeviest, pimpliest, greasiest guys. You gotta have higher standards than to love these people and what they did to this music. So that's one. Number 2, Symphonies 1 through 4. Roger Norrington with the London Classical Players on Warner, formerly EMI. Well, this was the beginning of the original instrument apocalypse, the attack on romantic music, and the sadly effective ability to convince people that this expressionless, tinny, awful sound was somehow authentic. There was nothing authentic about it. It was all a total fiction and a con job. It really was. And a lot of people got conned, and they're very determined to insist that they weren't conned, and that people like Norrington were actually doing something that had a pretense to authenticity. Well, we really do know better now, of course, but old habits die hard, and the period instrument dogma on how this music should be played as just that. It's an old habit. Mahler famously said, "Tradition ist Schlamperei." Tradition is slovenliness. And he was right. And, it used to be that the tradition, supposedly, that the period instrument people were opposing was the modern standard of playing. Now, the Schlamperei is the period instrument method of playing, because it's become a method which is as witlessly applied and adhered to as anything in the more traditional sense. But the tradition of Brahms' performance was a little bit different from some of the other things, because we know what it was, and we always knew that people like Norrington were wrong. Brunewalter and Klemperer and the conductors Toscanini who were in a position to know Brahms, Pierre Monteux, who played string quartets with Brahms. They all played this music, and they played it in the modern sense with modern instruments, the modern way, and it was correct, aesthetically and historically correct. And they were in a position to know because they were there when Brahms was there. And so, these people come along and their memories are so short. They say, no, everybody's wrong. All these living conductors who made stereo recordings embodying their best versions of music by the composer who they knew or were in a position to know or who lived contemporaneously with. The whole thing is just beyond stupid. And the fact that the Norringtons of the world were able to convince people of this is a sad commentary on people's lack of historical grounding in the basic reality, all of which is out there. The evidence is out there. It's not like it was a secret. So yeah, Norrington's Brahms, atrocious for, too many reasons to list. Next, a German Requiem with Hubert von Karajan. Oh yes, good old Herbert. Well, Karajan recorded the German Requiem 4 times. The best version was his first. It dates from around 1947. It was on Warner. It was before he became Karajan. He still had to pay attention to what the orchestra wanted to do, to approach them on a more equal basis. And he was in much better shape back in the 40s. Then after he got a hold of the Berlin Philharmonic and he started re-recording things and remaking them in his image. And his image of sacred choral music was a really strange one because, he was a Eastern religion guy, which is fine. I mean, you don't have to be Christian. I mean, even Brahms wasn't terribly Christian, in doing the German Requiem. But Karajan, had this vision of, first of all, incredibly thick string sound, ignoring woodwinds and brass and people like that in favor of the strings. He hated choirs because he couldn't control them the way that he could control string sections, and they didn't always correspond to his ideal of orchestral blend. So his choral recordings started to push the choir further and further away, even in choral works where you really need to know what the words are. And he had this idea of transcendental religion that was very, I don't know if it was superficial. I'm sure he believed it very seriously, but there was a slickness and this idea that as long as it was slow and thick and oleaginous, that, the more of those things it was, the more spiritual it must be. And the best performances of the German Requiem are the ones that simply take it on its own terms as music and don't sentimentalize the music. You're talking about Klemperer and Blomstedt, people who had deep religious and spiritual feelings, but who didn't wear them on their sleeve, who didn't try and give you a sense of the work that says, hey, this is religious. Look at how religious I can be. Look at how spiritual I can be. They achieved the spirituality through simplicity, through honesty of utterance. And that was all foreign to Karajan's aesthetic. So his German Requiem, I just think, is appalling. And definitely one of the worst Brahms things in the world. But the ones with the Berlin Philharmonic on Deutsche Grammophon, his first DG ones, where he was imposing his concept of sound on the work, rather than allowing what the music wanted to express, emerge naturally from the performance. So that's that one. Next, couple of the third symphonies. It's the one that everybody blows. I mean, even Toscanini didn't do a very good job with the third symphony. Everybody had issues. Who's going to have issues with Brahms symphonies has real problems with the third for some reason. In some ways, it's got some of Brahms' worst orchestration and some of his most beautiful orchestration. And, of course, it has the slow ending and the finale, which is incredibly turbulent and exciting, and you have to really whip it up. First movement that's very hard to pull off in terms of tempo relationships. And two of the worst, I mean, we're talking really worst, are, first of all, Furtwängler with the Berlin Philharmonic on Warner. Now, there are a bunch of Furtwängler Brahms thirds, and most of them are better than that. And Furtwängler was, generally speaking, a pretty good Brahms conductor. I mean, his first was stunning. I mean, that was a piece he really, really owned, you know. It was just terrific. But the third requires a degree of ensemble finesse, which he was seldom able to summon in performance. He would just go crazy. You know the way he used to conduct. He would stick his baton out. Then he would have what looked kind of like an epileptic seizure or a major attack of Parkinson's disease, and he would just start doing this with his baton and trembling, and then the orchestra would play. And sometimes they would be together, sometimes they wouldn't. Well, this performance of the third, particularly at the finale, is an embarrassment. He manages to get the Berlin Philharmonic to sound like a truly amateur high school orchestra reading the music for the very first time. It's just a mess everywhere. It's just incredibly bad. Everything's going wrong. It never should have been released. Never should have been released. I don't believe Furtwängler ever approved that it should be released. Most of his recordings were not approved. They're live, and people just took them and got their hands on them and issued them, whether he liked it or not. But he did better work elsewhere, so okay. But that one, the Warner one, in the Brahms cycle, that's a ball buster of a mess. And last but not least, Leopold Stokowski with the Houston Symphony on Everest. Oh, this is bad in completely opposite ways at the same time. The first way is that horrible push me, pull you approach to tempo, which Stokowski does in the first movement. You know, where the opening starts out really fast, it gets slower and slower and slower and slower until you get to the second subject. Then it has to speed up again, and it's just structurally deficient and musically vulgar. Really, really bad. But then in the finale, he conducts with a metronomic lack of expression in this really exciting allegro part. It's staggering. It's as if he's totally uninterested, and he's just sitting there going tick tock, and the orchestra is going tum, ba-dum, 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 ba-da. Da 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 da. I mean, there's nothing happening. It's really, really incomprehensible and so out of character of Brahms. I mean, of the music itself, and never mind Stokowski. It's really, really so weird and anti-musical. It's got to be. It's really possibly the worst Brahms performance ever. I mean, it's really up there, let's put it that way. So there you have it, the 5 worst Brahms recordings. I'd be dazzled to see your list, particularly in things that are not orchestral music. I'd like to hear from you if you have some people who do some of the chamber works or piano works really, really poorly. I have a few of those, but I thought I would leave the heavy lifting to you folks because you're just so good at it. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.